Okay, welcome everyone to a new episode of Technique Tuesday. This week we're going to be looking at how to perform the lateral raise with perfect technique. Now, I think that the lateral raise is one of the, if not the most important isolation exercise out there from a physique development perspective, because first of all, capped lateral delts are going to create an X-frame appearance through wider shoulders and the illusion of a smaller waist. And second, most of the basic heavy compound exercises just aren't that effective at targeting the lateral deltoid. Now, for example, this 2013 study found that the free weight lateral raise and cable lateral raise both elicited very high levels of side delt activation, while the shoulder press and bench press both had comparably very minimal activity. So in order to optimize growth of the side delt in particular, I think we probably should be isolating it. But before we jump into training technique itself, let's have a quick look at what muscles we're going to be targeting with this movement first. So with the lateral raise, we're going to be training primarily shoulder abduction, so raising your arm out to the side, and this will be handled mainly by the lateral deltoid. So unless you do the lateral raise completely out to the side, there will also be some degree of shoulder flexion occurring as the dumbbells come slightly forward, which means the front delts will be active to a degree. And the scapular upward rotation component will be handled by the upper traps, although as we'll see, we can help take the traps out of the movement with proper cueing. Now, before we get into the basic dumbbell lateral raise, I just want to say up front that my personal favorite variation is the Egyptian cable lateral raise, where you pass the cable between your legs and lean into the direction of the raise. Now, leaning away is based on some data from McMahon et al., showing that the middle deltoid is more important near the end range of motion, whereas the supraspinatus of the rotator cuff is more involved near the beginning. And passing the cable between your legs just allows for a more comfortable position where you don't need to worry about the cable hitting your body on the way up. There will also be more consistent tension with the cable than with the dumbbell, since the dumbbell moves in a circular resistance path, meaning it'll reach peak tension at the top with minimal tension at the bottom. However, it isn't perfectly clear what the implications are of this for hypertrophy, so my best advice would be to just pick a variation that you like, that you can feel working your delts, and just get better at it over time. But because the dumbbell lateral raise is the most basic and easily accessible, it's the variation we'll be covering in detail here. Now, there are also many other creative ways that you can do the same basic movement with bands, machines, kettlebells, and so on. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with experimenting, and I am a fan of exercise creativity, but I also think that there's a limit to how much extra benefit you're going to get out of making the movement just more and more convoluted or ridiculous. And since this is a single joint isolation movement with a long lever arm, we want to be using lighter weights in a higher rep zone, something around 10 to 20 or even as high as 30 reps. And since there will come a point where further load increases will just result in inevitable form breakdown at a certain point, which is usually around 15 to 30 pound dumbbells, rather than focusing on increasing the weight, I think we should instead focus on progressively overloading by improving technique, improving the mind-muscle connection, or improving the pump. And one of the immediate goals with the lateral raise is to reduce momentum as much as possible, especially while you're still perfecting proper form. And one way to do this is by performing the movement seated. However, I find the bench can sometimes get in the way, so you can also just keep your glutes flexed throughout the range of motion, which is going to prevent excessive movement at the hips. So you want to grip the dumbbell with your index finger up against the head of the dumbbell, with your pinky closer to the middle of the handle, unless you find that awkward. And this is going to force the side delts to work harder by increasing the internal rotation moment at the top. Many people find a thumbless grip more comfortable here, but I would say either a full grip or a false grip, both are fine since the weight is going to be light anyway. Now, if you notice a clicking sound in your shoulder, you can try flexing or pulling your lats in between reps, and based on my experience, this can help reduce it in many cases. You want to make sure that your shoulder blades are retracted, and then you want to initiate the concentric by leading out and up with your elbow. Rather than lifting the dumbbell straight out to the side, you should raise the dumbbell in the scapular plane, around 15 to 30 degrees to the front when viewed from the top. And throughout the positive, you should think about only flexing your lateral delt to move the weight, while keeping your forearms and upper arm soft. And there are a few cues that I personally find helpful for engaging the lateral head. First, I often think about pulling the distal or outer aspect of the delt toward the medial or inner aspect throughout the positive. I also think about sweeping the weight out rather than just lifting the weight up, where sweeping out is going to help get the side delts more involved over the traps, which get more involved as you sort of shrug the weight up. And once I clear the first half of the positive, I'll slightly internally rotate by raising my pinky slightly higher than my thumb, which might shift emphasis away from the front delt and onto the side delt. However, research has suggested that this cue may present an increased impingement risk, so you'll want to use it at your own discretion. And if you do use it, just make sure that your shoulder blades are retracted, you're lifting in the scapular plane and ending the range of motion once your elbow reaches shoulder height. And actually, just before recording the video here, I was speaking with Greg Nuckols of the Mass Research Review panel, and he suggested that because the fibers of the lateral delt run in a bunch of different directions, it might make the most sense to do some reps with internal rotation, some reps with a neutral grip, and some with external rotation, just to make sure all of the fibers are being stimulated to a significant degree. So that may be something worth trying out for yourself. Now, the negative is going to be a controlled reversal of the positive, and as a more advanced technique, you can keep constant tension on the delts by starting another rep without having the dumbbells come to a full stop at the bottom. But I would say that as you master form, you probably should release tension at the bottom and initiate every rep from a quick pause, which is going to help prevent any swinging or momentum as you begin to fatigue. So I would say by far the most common error that I see here is just going too heavy. In my experience, even at the high level, most people won't be able to maintain proper form with dumbbells heavier than 30 pounds or so. And as you begin to load more heavily, at a certain point, you'll just progressively get more assistance from other muscles that are themselves better trained and better targeted with other movements. So for some point of reference here, you can see Kai Green at 300 pounds doing high rep working sets with 20-pound dumbbells. So for an isolation movement like this, you really want to make sure your posture is consistent. And once you start to fatigue at the end of the set, it should come as a result of you not being able to lift your arms to the same height with everything else being held in the same position. Now, I'm not against controlled cheating as an advanced technique, but I do think that it should be used as an advanced intensity technique, which is something that I'm going to be covering in a separate advanced technique series after Technique Tuesday finishes up sometime around summer. Now, another common error that I see here all the time is to essentially turn the lateral raise into a front raise, but you want to remember that the scapular plane is only about 15 to 30 degrees forward from perpendicular, so you shouldn't be lifting the dumbbells excessively out in front, which is going to defeat the whole purpose of the exercise, as it just further emphasizes the front delt, which is already going to be hit to a very large degree from any bench pressing or overhead pressing in your program. Now, when it comes to alternatives, apart from variations that use, say, cables, bands, or machines, I actually personally don't think there is much of a replacement for the lateral raise. Now, when performed properly, an upright row can hit the lateral delts quite well. However, as a compound movement, it is going to get the traps more heavily involved, and we're going to be covering that in detail in a future Technique Tuesday episode. So that's all that I have, guys, for the lateral raise. If you enjoyed the video, please leave me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss future Technique Tuesday episodes, and I'll see you guys all here in the next one for the hip thrust.